Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating piece of history, one that literally built the modern corporate world as we know it. We're going to look at how John D. Rockefeller's brilliant, yet absolutely ruthless business mechanics brought order to a totally chaotic industry and essentially forced the creation of the antitrust laws we still use today.
So, to really understand Rockefeller, we first need to ask, how do you tame a completely wild industry? Because you have to remember, before Standard Oil came along, the 1860s oil boom was just a wasteful, chaotic mess. I mean, you had thousands of speculators literally blowing holes in the ground, trying to strike it rich, and most of them failed. But even the ones who succeeded didn't really need to be efficient. Actually, early refiners kept the 60% of the crude oil that became kerosene, but they would take the remaining 40%, what they just considered useless waste, and dump it right into nearby creeks and rivers. It was a total economic and environmental free-for-all.
All right, so here is our agenda for this explainer. First, we'll look at the chaotic oil boom, then move to the Cleveland massacre, check out mastering vertical integration, uncover his secret deals and rebates, examine the Standard Oil monopoly, and finally, explore the birth of antitrust.
Starting off with Section 1, the chaotic oil boom. This was an era defined by wasted crude and super high consumer prices.
Which brings us right to Section 2, the Cleveland Massacre. This is where Rockefeller starts systematically absorbing the competition.
Now, what's really wild about this is the mechanics of his takeovers. They were so cold and calculated. He didn't just outcompete his rivals in the traditional sense, He basically presented them with an inevitable mathematical defeat. Step 1. He literally just showed competitors the Standard Oil books so they could see exactly what they were up against. Step 2. He'd make them a completely fair offer for their assets, and if they refused, Step 3. He'd calmly tell them he was going to run them into bankruptcy and then just buy up their assets at auction for cheap anyway. It was absolutely clinical.
And using this exact, unrelenting tactic, Standard Oil absorbed 22 of its 26 Cleveland competitors. And get this, he did all of that in less than 4 months back in 1872. This period of rapid consolidation was so unbelievably aggressive, it literally became known as the Cleveland Massacre.
But just buying out rivals wasn't going to be enough to build a global empire. Let's move to Section 3, mastering vertical integration and controlling the supply chain. So the crucial piece of the puzzle here is vertical integration. This is defined as the centralized control of large aggregations of plant and capital to ensure an orderly flow of products from the producer all the way to the consumer. Standard Oil essentially pioneered and perfected this strategy to completely lock out any possible competition. Rockefeller's true genius was eliminating waste by controlling absolutely every single step of the oil's journey.
And his obsession with efficiency was, well, it was staggering. Instead of buying barrels for $2.50 each from someone else, Rockefeller just bought the wood and had his team build them themselves, dropping the cost to just 96 cents. They hired their own plumbers, they laid their own pipelines to avoid paying railroad fees, they even completely bypassed wholesale middlemen by setting up their own home delivery network using tank wagons. And remember that 40% of oil waste being dumped into the rivers? Standard Oil figured out how to use the gasoline to fuel their own refineries, and they sold the rest of the sludge as petroleum jelly, paraffin wax, and tar. They literally created over 300 byproducts out of what used to be trash.
Still, efficiency alone doesn't create a total monopoly. That leads us to Section 4, secret deals and rebates, and how Standard Oil weaponized the railroads.
To maintain this massive, integrated machine, Rockefeller negotiated some highly controversial transportation advantages. Through a cartel called the South Improvement Company, Standard Oil managed to secure secret freight rebates of up to 50%. But, incredibly, the deal didn't stop there. The railroads actually paid Standard Oil a rebate every single time a competitor shipped their own oil. Just imagine that for a second, your competitor making money every time you make a sale. It was a ridiculously powerful and obviously highly contentious advantage.
So let's look at Section 5 and see how all of this builds into an aura of total corporate invincibility by the late 1870s, the Standard Oil monopoly. Through that relentless vertical integration, the competitive buyouts we talked about, and those secret railroad deals, Standard Oil eventually controlled an astonishing 90% of all oil refining in the United States. 90%! They had a near total grip on the entire industry.
Now, our sources present a really complex duality here, and we need to look at both sides of this objectively. On one hand, you've got the ruthless monopolist. He's heavily criticized for using espionage, secret railroad rebates, and predatory pricing,
sometimes even selling below cost, just to crush independent rivals. But on the other side of the coin, we have the efficiency pioneer. By coming in and replacing those chaotic, inefficient systems, Rockefeller managed to drop the price of kerosene by nearly 80%. Beforehand, oil light was mostly a luxury for the wealthy who bought expensive whale oil. Standard Oil actually made kerosene affordable for the average working-class household. However, as you might guess, this unprecedented aggregation of corporate power absolutely terrified the public and politicians. Which brings us to our final section, the birth of antitrust, where the government finally steps in.
We can actually trace the birth of modern antitrust law right through this timeline. In 1879, the Hepburn Committee officially exposed those secret railroad rebates, which naturally sparked massive public outrage. In response, by 1882, Rockefeller tried to further centralize his holdings by creating the Standard Oil Trust to bypass tricky state laws. But this immense concentration of power pushed Congress to pass the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. Fast forward to 1904, and journalist Ida Tarbell publishes a devastating exposé uncovering the company's heavy-handed tactics. And all of this finally culminates in 1911, when the U.S. Supreme Court found Standard Oil in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act and ordered the entire trust to be broken up into 34 separate companies.
But here is where the story takes a super fascinating twist. You'd probably assume the government breakup completely ruined Rockefeller, right? Actually, it did the exact opposite. Because Rockefeller had rarely sold his shares over the years, he retained an over 25% stake in all of the newly formed spin-offs. We're talking about companies you definitely recognize today, like Exxon, Chevron, and Mobil. Once they were unleashed to operate independently, their combined net worth absolutely skyrocketed on the stock market. Because of that, the breakup caused Rockefeller's personal wealth to basically quintuple, surging to around $900 million.
Ultimately, if you want to understand the mindset behind this entire empire, we have to look at his core philosophy. Summed up in a quote famously attributed to him, "Competition is a sin." Despite all the public outrage, Rockefeller genuinely viewed himself as the savior of the industry. To him, those early oil days were just wasteful and destructive. He actually believed he was an angel of mercy, replacing the chaos of raw competition with the beautiful efficiency of absolute, centralized order.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to leave with this thought. Look around at today's sprawling corporate empires, the massive tech giants and global conglomerates that we all use every day. Are the modern antitrust battles we are fighting right now born directly from John D. Rockefeller's blueprint? Did he essentially write the playbook for modern market dominance? It's definitely something to think about the next time you hear the word monopoly. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. See you next time.